pretty excited about next week in our beginning Disciples Path. And I want to take some time for us to really talk about what it is to be a disciple. Because sometimes it feels like that, where you just want to scream and run away. And sometimes it feels great, like you're in the center of God's plan and you can sense the presence of God. And so discipleship is all of those experiences. It's the good times, the bad times, the easy times, the hard times, and that process is what shapes us and makes us into what we're going to be. And so I want to take some time today, and I have a poem that I really like. It's a Robert Frost poem. I don't often read a lot of secular literature and things during sermons, but I think this one has some spiritual narratives within it. Whether or not Mr. Frost intended to do that, probably not. But I want to read that poem to you. How many people are familiar with that? Maybe you read it in English class. I have to say, to be completely honest with you, English is not my favorite subject, and it's not really that I have anything against English or I'm not interested in it, but I found that the grammar and a lot of the meticulous writing of sentences and sentence structure was particularly a struggle to get it exactly, precisely right. So, but when I got to like narratives and poems and finding the hidden meaning, the allegory inside of something, then I began to be a little more interested. So for those of you who are like me and you like to draw out the hidden meaning, then this poem is for you today. Let me read this to you. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that passing, there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. So let's talk just briefly about this poem and what it means. I tried to kind of put a word picture up there for you. I don't know if that counts as a yellow woods or not, but you can kind of see the two paths. One is a little bit more worn, the other not. And I find that often in life we find ourselves in this exact place. And in fact, I think the poem is inspired by those forks in the road where we have to make a choice, where we have to decide if we're going to go a certain way or a different way. And we recognize that the significance of that choice will define us, that it will determine who ultimately we're going to be. And when we get down the road and we become 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 plus years old, that because we chose a certain path, and we wind up at the end of a certain place. Just like when you are got your phone out, or I saw in a movie, Stephanie's been watching some old movies this past week, and I actually saw somebody open up an atlas, like, you know, the paper ones that used to fold up and you'd open it. And if you're younger, you may never have seen one of those, or maybe you saw it in a museum. But that's actually how we used to get places, is you would open up this big atlas and you would try to read it and figure out where things are going to go. But or if you're, got your phone and you're using Google, determining on which way you turn, whether to the left or to the right, you're either going to get to where you're going or you're not going to get to. And in this poem, he's talking about the significance of that choice. And that we can choose the grassy road. In fact, it says he chose the one that was grassy and wanted wear. In other words, it was the road that wasn't as traveled as much. It was a road that was less traveled. And I think it's interesting that oftentimes, by and large, we pick the road that's the most traveled. And we figure, well, other people have done this, so I'm going to make the same choice. It usually is kind of the easier path that might seem a little bit more comfortable, that might have more knowns to it. Oftentimes we don't like to make choices where there's a lot of unknowns. And that's the whole idea about avoiding risk, right? We try to avoid that because we don't want to discover anything for the first time. We don't want to be the quote-unquote guinea pig. We would rather it be the case that somebody else is the guinea pig and we'll just kind of follow after them. We see a similar image in Matthew chapter 7. So if you have your Bibles open to that. And incidentally, if you want to use the internet so you can use your phone Bible, if you don't have an offline version downloaded, you can go to Foxfi. We broadcast that every week, and it's LJC Rocks. I wonder who made up that password. All lowercase, all one word. And you can log in, and that way you can read along with us if that is something that you need. But I want to read this. It's Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. It says, "Enter through the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the road is broad that leads to destruction. And there are many who go through it. How narrow is the gate and how difficult the road that leads to life. And few find it." Few find it. I can remember being a kid, and I asked one of my children's ministry leaders one time, I said, well, do you think that there are more good people or more bad people in the world? I mean, that's just one of those questions you kind of ponder. And I was expecting for my Sunday school leader to say, oh, well, there's mostly good people. There's just a few bad people, and he said, well, there's more bad people in the world. And it really shocked me, and I had to kind of think about that and just go, man, really? There's more bad people in the world? And really, the question that I was wanting to know is it easier to be good or is it easier to be bad? Because it's easier to be bad, right? It doesn't require self-control. It doesn't require hard choices. We just kind of do what our flesh wants to do, and then we just don't worry about the consequences. And of course, they ultimately catch up with us. But we like to just ignore that part, live for today, and let tomorrow just, whatever happens, happens. But the Bible says that we are to enter through the narrow gate, the road less traveled. Often the more challenging road, the more obscure road, the road that has more unknowns to it. And I have learned in my life personally that becoming a Christian or being a Christian or living the Christian life is the road less traveled. It is the road that is often not taken because it is challenging, because it seems difficult. And that path of discipleship, that process of discipleship can be treacherous and it can seem really steep. Now, for some of you guys, and I felt this way before, when people start talking about discipleship, I just want to kind of glaze over and go, oh man, this is so boring. I really don't care about discipleship. Let's just talk about something fun. Let's talk about something interesting. Let's talk about getting on the mission field and learn to speak a new language and, just the cool stuff. Let's just forget about discipleship. And usually we have that attitude because we know that becoming a disciple, becoming a follower of Christ is a long, 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 hard road. Why is it that most of us don't become medical doctors or attorneys? Well, for some of us, we're just not inclined to do that. We're not good at reading legal briefs, or we're not good at cutting people open and, doing stuff with their innards. But a big obstacle towards that is the level of education that's required, right? Because there is a lot of education. I mean, you go to one aspect and the next aspect and the next aspect, and it just seems like your life is half over by the time you actually have enough degrees and enough education to do that, right? So that can become an obstacle. And discipleship can seem like that. It can seem like that. And so I want to challenge you to not think of it as this never-ending ladder of educational experiences or this process or, sitting here. It's like if you listen to 5,000 sermons, somehow you are going to be discipled. All right? Discipleship is not like that at all. Discipleship involves us embracing the experiences of life and mixing them together with that knowledge, and that's what gives us wisdom. That's what gives us discipleship. If you're looking for the kind of the cut and dried, black and white mathematical formula, it's knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. All right, so we take the things that we learn intellectually and then we tie them in with the things that we experience because of the choices that we make. And then as a result of those two things being combined, then we become disciples. We become wise. Now let's look at the book of Luke, because Luke has a lot of things to say about being a disciple. Now, it might surprise you to know the word disciple does not appear in the Bible until the New Testament. Now, that's kind of interesting to me because there are very few words, if you have a concordance or if you're just that nerdy that you go to the library or whatever and you check out a concordance and you start looking at certain words, you will find that most words appear in both places. But the word disciple actually only appears in the New Testament. And I believe that is because being a disciple is linked together very closely with Christ, with the person of Christ. That it is the first time ever in a living situation that we are to emulate someone. And so Luke, who incidentally was a doctor, he talks a lot about what a disciple is and what a disciple isn't. And he starts with what a disciple is not. And let's look at that, found in Luke chapter 6, verses 39 and 40. It says, "He also told them a parable. Can the blind guide the blind? Won't they both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher." All right, so he starts with talking about what a disciple is not. A disciple is not above their teacher. In other words, when we are on the path of discipleship, we're always striving for a high goal. All right, we have a high vision and a high path to travel. So it's not like oftentimes we look at maybe like Victor was today, kind of learning. We started with our new video computer, which worked wonderfully, I think, at least as far as I could tell. So I was really relieved that was the case. And so probably we can all go back there, and with more or less training, we could learn to do that, and we could become expert videographers, video runners, video technicians. But discipleship isn't like that. It's not like you need to learn X, Y, Z, and then as soon as you learn those things, you're discipled. All right? Discipleship is not like that. Discipleship is a process, and it takes the whole of who we are, experiencing all of the things that are required, and then eventually we start to look and become like Christ. That's what discipleship is, and that's what Luke is trying to allude to. Being a disciple is unique to following Christ because we are to emulate Him. We are to do the things that He did. Not to be exactly like Him, because obviously we're not going to somehow, go through some process and become God, all right? There's only one God. But we are going to look more and more like Christ. That the way that He loved people, the way that He demonstrated patience and perseverance, and He just experienced peacefulness in life, even in spite of all the chaos and the terror that was happening in His life and in the Roman world. He was at peace. And so that stands in contrast to the wider road, right? Because typically, when you're sitting down, you watch a movie, a TV series, and you see how people react when something bad happens. They get mad or sad. And when something good happens, they're really glad and happy and on top of the world, right? And this is just roller coaster of emotions, and they're ruled by the flesh. The flesh has conquered them. It rules them. So they're not free, right? They're slaves to that. They're not free to experience what it is to have free will, because they've just given themselves over to the flesh. And that's why Christ came, to give us freedom. And so ultimately, the path of discipleship is a path to freedom. It is a path out of slavery, out of the bondage of doing what the flesh wants. And that is tough. Man, I am somewhere in the middle of that process, because the flesh still tempts me to do or to not do certain things that I know I ought not to or ought to do. Let's look at a longer passage. It's found in Luke chapter 14. And it's kind of almost a treatise on what it is to be a disciple, what it means to be discipled. And I want us to kind of go through this. There's several different sections. It kind of starts out with a little bit of a story, and then it goes into what the actual cost is. Because there is a cost of being a disciple. Just like there's a cost for any type of education or training, there is a cost to becoming a disciple. And most people, when they get into it and they realize what the cost is, they fall away. All right, and that's what Luke begins to talk about here in verse 15 through 23. Let's read that. It says, "When one of those who reclined at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, The one who will eat bread in the kingdom of God is blessed." And then he told him, "A man was giving a large banquet and invited many. And at the time of the banquet, he sent his slave to tell those who were invited, 'Come, because everything is now ready.'" All right, so it's kind of like, dinner's ready, come on. But without exception, they all began to make excuses. All right, now remember, this guy is at his expense. He's put on this huge banquet. All right, it's like the owner of I don't know, your favorite restaurant, Olive Garden, Longhorn, that Bud and Waltz there in Nixa, whatever your favorite place is. They call you up and say, "Hey, you know what? I'm having this big party and I want you to come. You are invited and it's free. It's on me. You can order all the steak and shrimp and breadsticks and pizza and whatever you want, and I'm gonna cover the cost of all of it." Okay? That would be pretty cool. Okay? I mean, I would be like, okay, sign me up. I will bring my entire clan of 7 people and we will take you up on that. All right? And I would venture to say that probably most of us would do that if we had time. Okay? But now these guys, instead of being like, "Heck yeah, man, let's do it." Here we go. The first one says, "Well, I have bought a field and I have to go out and see it. So please excuse me." Okay, I bought a field and I need to go out and see it. I mean, hopefully he saw it before he bought it, but I don't know. All right? That was the first excuse. Okay, another said in verse 19, "I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm going to try them out. So please excuse me." Because he could eat and then go try them out, but no, he's just going to go try them out. All right? He's bought these oxes, which would be kind of cool. I would like to have an ox just to, I don't know what I'd do with an ox, but it would be cool to have one. But he's gonna go mess with his oxes. Another one said, "I just got married and therefore I'm unable to come." Well, that one I could kind of get. The next one. "So the slave came back and reported these things to his master. And in anger, the master of the house told his slave, 'Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the city and bring in here the poor, maimed, blind, and lame.' 'Master,' the slave said, 'what you ordered has been done, and there's still room.' And then the master told the slave, 'Go out into the highways and lanes and make them come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, not one of those men who were invited will enjoy my banquet.'" Right? So in other words, this is likening this example of this free meal or this big party that people have been invited to the kingdom of heaven. All right? And God has said, "Man, I have paid the price for your sin. I have created heaven, and you can come and enjoy it for eternity. And all I'm asking is for you to come. I'm just saying, hey, come and live in the kingdom of heaven and participate it and enjoy it with me." And many said, "I've got other things to do. I'd rather not." Unwisely have said that. And so God is searching. He is searching the world for those who would respond to his invitation. All right? Who would respond and say, "Yeah, I want to be a disciple. I want to be discipled. I want to make disciples." And so that's the invitation that Luke gives to us. And he says, this is what the kingdom of God's like. This is who God is. This is the heart of him that loves the world and wants to see people come to heaven, come to this great cosmic party. And so we are people, if we have made that decision then that have accepted the invitation. It's like on Facebook, and you can choose going, maybe, which is like probably not, or no, which almost no one ever does. You're either like you click maybe because you just don't want to hurt their feelings, but you're really not planning on going, or you click going and hopefully you actually will follow through with that. But that's kind of the choice that's right there. And so we have to decide what we're going to click. Right? And if we are really serious about being followers of Christ, then we have to be serious about this process of discipleship. All right, now, choosing to become a disciple is hard enough. All right, and that's the choice that we've dealt with to this point, is choosing to be a disciple. To say, you know what, yes, I will go through this process. I will humble myself. I will endure this. I will learn what I need to know. I will walk in the path that Christ has called me to. But then it doesn't stop there, because not only does God ask us to be disciples, and here's where it gets really, really tough if it wasn't hard enough already, He calls us to be disciple makers, to be people who disciple others, who bring us on this journey, and we walk this path, and now all of a sudden He says, now I want you to go and I want you to invite someone else to walk this path with you. See, isn't that exactly what Jesus did? When he lived out His ministry, and he went and He invited people to join Him on that journey. He invited Simon, who became Peter. He invited John and James and all the apostles and all the other disciples that followed Him, that would go out in the middle of nowhere, and when He would sit on a hill and teach, and when He would go and He would heal the blind and the lame and the sick. Those were His disciples. And those apostles that He called out, they became disciple makers. And in fact, today, all of us, every single one of us, and I've made this statement before in several different ways, but all of us are here because somebody was willing to be a disciple maker. If you're a believer, if you're here today and you're a believer, that somebody said, yes, I will be a disciple maker, and they shared truth with you. They took the invitation that they had received from the kingdom of heaven, and they shared that and said, hey, I got this pass, and I want you to go with me. And they invited you, and that's why we're here. That's why I'm here. Because somebody cared enough to invite me to be a part of that. And so that's the choice that stands in front of us. And so, and I hope that at least at this point, you realize why our leadership is so excited about Disciples Path. Because this is a way that as a church we can get serious about becoming disciples and making disciples. Because ultimately that is what a church is about. Now it's easy, I will say, it's very tempting and it's very easy to get into having the best building, having the best worship, having the best preaching, having the best whatever. But that consumer mentality of church often ends in a self-centered worship experience, where the church becomes so concerned with themselves and what they want and what's comfortable and easy, they forget about the rest of the world. And that field that is ready to be harvested, the fruit and the vegetables, they just start to rot out there. And so we have made a big decision and said, you know what, we're going to go through this process of refining, and we're going to invite our church family to go with us. And this is going to be a great opportunity for the next 36 weeks, beginning next week, to invite somebody else to come and participate in it. They don't have to be a believer. They don't even have to like the idea of going to church. They don't have to pay anything, at least in monetary value. They can just come and listen and hear and understand what it means to be a disciple. And our hope is that on this process, as we're walking this path, those that are not followers of Christ will become followers of Christ. Those of us that have kind of started that journey, but we just kind of got stuck somewhere in no man's land, that we can move on and become disciples. And for those of us who are disciples, we can begin to be disciple makers, to choose to make disciples. Because I would say it is probably better to disciple one person in your life than to invite 1,000 people to church. Because those 1,000 people, if they don't ever become disciple, they've really gained nothing. They've really not gained anything. All right, let's keep reading. Verse 25. It says, now great crowds were traveling with Him. And so He turned and He said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Okay, so now I've spent a lot of time on this verse in different sermons. So instead of focusing on the family aspects of this and the friend aspects, I want us to focus on this first sentence. It said, great crowds were traveling with Him. In other words, Jesus turned around, He saw all His people, and He says, this is a problem. It's like, what? Isn't that the goal, right? I mean, if 1,000 people showed up to Life's Journey next weekend on Sunday afternoon, that would be awesome. I'm not sure how we would fit them in here, but that would just be an awesome problem to have. Instead of having, hundreds of empty seats and the problem being we're lacking the people, right? That would be a cool thing. But Jesus, He had that. He had 1,000 people behind Him, and He's like, oh man, this is totally wrong. Because you realize that they were just caught up in the hype. They were just doing the thing that other people were doing. They weren't really following Him. They weren't really becoming disciples. They were just kind of doing the crowd, Christian, whatever thing, because everybody was doing it. It was cool, and it seemed fun and exciting, and they were probably feeling a little pioneerish and revolutionary because the Romans had said, You can't, there is no God, and Jews are bad, and we're going to beat you and make you be our slaves. And so they were thinking, man, this is a revolution, and they're getting all excited. And they really had no idea about this discipleship process that Jesus was on. So he turns around and he says, basically, here's the cost. You guys are all following me, and most of you have no idea why. You have no idea what you are following. And so he says, unless you give up everything, unless you give up even your own life, you cannot be my disciple. Now, I'm sure there's probably quite a few people in the crowd that were like, what? Because that was not at all what they thought they were signing up for. Let's read on. It says, for which of you, this is Jesus speaking, he said, for which of you wanting to build a tower doesn't first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, after he has laid the foundation and he cannot finish it, all the onlookers will begin to make fun of him, saying, this man started to build and he wasn't able to finish. Or what king going to war against another king will not first sit down and decide if he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If not, while the other is still far off, he sends a delegation and he asks for terms of peace because he knows he's going to lose. And in the same way, therefore, every one of you who does not say goodbye to all his possessions cannot be my disciple. Now let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about possessions and what does that mean? Because that's a pretty harsh statement. I mean, that's a pretty significant statement. And I'm going to use my guitar as an example to illustrate this. It's okay, Joey. I'm not going to break it over my head, just to look cool. All right, so this is my guitar. My parents got this for me for my birthday one year. The year actually we planted Life's Journey, that's spring before. It's a Martin. It's a really nice guitar. And I feel a sense of ownership towards this guitar, right? And so what it sounds like is that Jesus is saying, well, I've got to get rid of all my possessions because they're a stumbling block for me, because I'm going to love them more than God if I'm not careful, right? And it may be in the very literal case, if you absolutely cannot give up control, it may be better for you to sell everything you have. That if you just absolutely cannot stop worshiping it, then you may need to get rid of it all. You need to get rid of anything that is an obstacle to you becoming a disciple. All right? So that in its extreme sense, it is absolutely true. But here's the deal. I can look at that guitar and say, you know what? I have sold that guitar. It's the Lord's. It belongs to Him. And if God decides to let me to continue to use that guitar, then it's still in my possession, and I can still use that and enjoy that. But there's a big difference, right? Because I realize it's not my guitar. I realize that I don't have ownership over it. I'm just a steward of it. I'm just using that because God allows me to. And so it's a fine line, and I think we have to be really careful with that fine line, because it's easy to say, oh yeah, okay, well that's fine. Well, I'll just keep everything I have and I'll keep hoarding and I'll just say that I'm a steward, because that's what the pastor said to do. And so now I can still do everything I want to do. And so you have to not skip through that, and we have to understand that anything that is an obstacle for us becoming a disciple, we have to deal with that. We have to deal with that. And today that's what I want to invite you to do, is to begin to deal with that and to begin to ask yourself this question: what is it in my life that keeps me from moving forward in that discipleship process? What is it? What is the obstacle? Is it a person or someone that I love them more than God, and I'm willing to do whatever they want me to do, and so I can't give that up? Is it a thing? Is it a habit? Is it some sin that you're just holding on to and you just can't give that up, and so you're just saying, man, I'd rather just not do the whole discipleship thing because I don't want to give up this sin? And I don't know what it is. Really, only you and God know what the answer to that is. But I would ask you, for just this moment before we close, I would ask you to consider that. What is it? And I'm not saying that if you don't figure that out before next Sunday that you can't begin this discipleship process with us, okay? I'm not saying that. That would probably eliminate almost all of us from attending. So I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is to begin to ask yourself, what is it? You know, when you start thinking, man, they're asking for a 36-week commitment, that sounds impossible. Okay, and I realize you have to miss a few. It's not like we're going to hunt you down and beat you because you were an evil, lazy Christian. All right, but you know, if that begins to just seem like impossible, then maybe you should ask, well, why is that? You know, is there something that I've put in my life is more important than becoming a disciple? And if there is, then we've got to tear that down. And that can be tough. That can be really tough because, I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff to do. I mean, there's Clash Royale, there's virtual reality, and there's room scale, and there's like phone ones. You stick your phone in and everything, you know. There's all kinds of sports all the time, especially on Sunday afternoons. And then when the weather's nice, you can go out into the woods or go over to Silver Dollar City or the lake or whatever. I mean, there's a million things to do. And some of you guys are like, yeah, what am I doing here? But if we're serious about our commitment to following Christ, then we have to decide, are we a fraud, all right? Are we just going to kind of fake it to make it? Or are we going to be the authentic, genuine, real thing? The real deal. I mean, whenever we buy something, we tend to want the real deal, right? We can't always afford it. Sometimes we'll buy a generic something or an off-brand because that's what we can afford to buy. But we want the real deal, right? Because we know that typically, I mean, that's going to be the thing that wears the longest, that performs the best. You know, it's going to be something that we're going to enjoy owning, enjoy having. So we want the real thing. But why is it then, when it comes to our spiritual growth, do we oftentimes just want to kind of fake it to make it? We just want to do the generic, artificial, yeah, okay, well, I'll pray and do my praying thing, and I'll, you know, maybe do an outreach this year, and I'll try to be at church maybe 30 out of 52 weeks, and I'll, you know, like every sixth Sunday I'll put 50 cents in the offering plate, and, you know, it's like we're going to kind of think of, well, what's the minimum I can do to get by and still be a Christian or still make God happy with me? I mean, is that the mindset that we have sometimes? I mean, I have to say that sometimes I follow that path. It's like, okay, well, this week, what's the minimum I can do to please God? When I should be saying, man, what is the maximum I can do? What is the ultimate thing I could do this week to please God? And that's the question that I should be trying to answer. And so let's take some time to pray and to seek God. I'm going to give you just a moment or two of silence so that you can really pray and talk with God on your own about that. And then we'll close and have a couple announcements.